Author Bret Easton Ellis is here. His first novel, Less Than Zero, was published before he graduated from college. It established him as one of the new voices capturing the decadence of his generation. He went on to write Rules of Attraction in 1987 and the controversial American Psycho in 1991. He published a collection of stories, The Informers, in 1994. It has been almost a decade since his last novel. He returns with what some call his most ambitious work yet, Glamorama. I am pleased to have him back at this table. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Charlie.
Oh, it's great to have you here. Now, how come it took you so long to write this?
Well, I began in 1989, and I finished it in 1997, and I thought I was going to finish it in 1993 or 1994, but a lot of personal problems got in the way and kept distracting me from finishing the book. One of them being, in fact, the American Psycho controversy, and then other more personal things, like my father passed away. I did a collection of short stories to fulfill a publishing contract. A relationship I was in was falling apart. And things got in the way. Life got in the way, actually, which happens when you're working on a novel. And it really hadn't happened to me before, and this time out it did. So instead of a 4-year process, it took 8 years. And if I really wanted to give you a percentage of the time I actually spent writing Glamorama and the time that I was dealing with these problems, it's more 5 years writing it, 3 years dealing with my personal life, sorting it out.
Your dad had a lot of influence on you? Was he a...
He had, well, he certainly taught me how not to behave, let's put it that way. And he was a good role model in that way. He was a very angry man, and he was fighting a lot of emotional battles, I think. And in the end, I don't know, I don't think he was very happy.
And your mom?
Mom was a great role model. Mom was a wonderful woman, is a wonderful woman, is one of the reasons why I think I'm, you know, dressed and speaking clearly right now rather than, you know, in, I don't know, some drug rehab center somewhere, unable to write a sentence. I mean, she was a big inspiration and still is, and has been a huge supporter of mine. Really, really cool lady.
Saw you through the worst, huh?
Saw me through the worst. Was there when things were going well, when things were going badly. Don't know what my life would have been like if she hadn't been there, in a way. Not only to protect me in a way from a kind of emotional violence that my father was capable of, and her combating that, but also just being what I suppose mothers should be like, you know? Just very, very cool. Very close with her.
What did American Psycho take out of you? What toll did it take?
Well, I think what it did was it forced me to grow up. And I know that sounds, I don't know, that sounds kind of grandiose. But, I mean, I was very young when I wrote that book, and I was very young, I still think, when I published it.
You're still very young. How old are you now?
I'm 34 now, but when I first started writing that book, I was 22 or 23, and I still had faith and a belief in the adult world. And I was the youngest person, more or less, in this publishing crowd that I was a part of. There really weren't a lot of writers my age running around. I was always the youngest kid at the table if a bunch of publishers or editors or writers went out. And I felt kind of protected by that in a way. And I felt that there was something to learn from these people. And there was something to learn. And I thought there was a great education going on there in my early 20s when I was living in New York. But when American Psycho was released, and it was so wildly misunderstood, my faith in the, I guess, safety of adults was eroded, let's put it that way. And that was the one thing that really was a good thing and a bad thing. It was very frightening, but in the end, that's the one thing I have to say now, that the world of adults, I realized I was heading toward it and I was going to become one. And it also proved to me that it wasn't that safe, and that adults can get things wrong, and that they're not always right. And I thought they were for a long time.
It also took a amount of time, too.
Yeah, it was very distracting.
To fight the controversy.
Well, you know, I wish I'd fought it more. And I know at the time when it came out, I had requests to be on, you know, every show from Larry King to Oprah Winfrey to, you know, whatever. David
going
Letterman,
right for
whatever.
the top, huh?
And just, but I think the problem was, and why I didn't do any of those things, was because the hysteria was loud. I mean, it was very loud, it was very vocal. People were very angry about this book, whether they'd read about it or not. And they'd heard horrible things about it. They'd read these excerpts that were taken completely out of context. And the publisher thought there was no way to win. You could go up there in your little suit and your little tie and show them that you have nice manners and that you're very polite and well-spoken, and it's not going to matter. The din is too loud. So maybe we don't do that, and maybe the book will, speak for itself and live on some way. And I have to say, at that time, it didn't bother me not to go out and protect the book and, defend it in any way, because I really believed that what I did was not what people said I did. I did not think the book was misogynist in intent. I did not think it was anti-feminist. I thought it was criticizing the times in which I lived, and it was critical of a certain sort of male behavior that I saw as being very pervasive in the culture of the time, but it was not meant to be anti-woman in any way. And I thought, and I believe it's happened, that the reputation of the book was going to change over the last...
You think time will help it change its reputation?
I think, just what I sense right now, I think time has changed its reputation. I think it's certainly... if you had told me 6 years ago that the biggest movie star in the world was going to want to appear in American Psycho,
Leonardo DiCaprio.
Talking about Leonardo DiCaprio, who was going to play the role and then backed out. If you had told me that he was going to that was going to happen 2 months after that book was published, I would have said, "You're crazy. That will never happen."
He wanted to play it because he was attracted to the role. Because he thought it would give him a chance to flex some muscles as an actor?
I think he wanted to play it because, I think he was attracted to the role, and there's a lot going on in that role for an actor, and it's a pretty wild role. But I think he wanted to make a point also that he was not Jack Dawson from Titanic, and that he could play darker characters. And I think he got his cake, and I think he got it and ate it too, because he proved that he didn't have to play it. He didn't have to run around with an axe, screaming 80s garbage and, acting like a madman. I think he proved to people that, without having to play the role, that he wants to play roles like that.
The fact that he was willing to do it...
Yes, was enough almost.
Achieved everything that he needed to achieve without playing the role.
I think so.
Yeah. Back to this book, Glamorama. Is it a departure for you?
Well, it's a departure for me if you've ever looked for a plot or a story in any of my novels, this is the first one that actually has one. And
it's going to get to that.
You know what? I say that, and
the boy has added narrative to his work.
I discovered it at a late date, but I finally discovered narrative, the pleasures of narrative. But well, yeah, that is true. I did discover the pleasures of narrative, but I didn't. My aesthetic when I was a young writer, when I was in my 20s, was that narrative was phony. It was artificial. Story was artificial. Plot was artificial. It was all fake. And what you really had to do is just be very true to a narrator's voice. Be very true to the milieu you're dissecting, and don't add a plot in, because it seems bookish. It seems too much like a novel, and I wanted
too much adultish, I think, would be your problem.
That could also be it. But my aesthetic was like that for a long time. But I think why Glamorama has a plot and the other books didn't is that this is a book that's really about a conspiracy. And I started thinking about, I wanted to write about a conspiracy when I began this book.
Right, before you go into that, there is this impression. You've got the guy who, who's some kind of stud and has all these relationships with all these, his best friend's girl and wife and mistress and everybody. Yeah. And it's almost like you've got this character and this milieu that you want to write about still, which is what you have in the past done best. Capture the kind of decadence of a time, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that so far,
and then because you want to have a narrative, you put him on a boat and he finds himself involved in terrorism and a conspiracy.
Yes.
Did that come after you had decided you want to tell a story about these people and you're looking for some kind of story to tell, so you create this terrorism?
Wanted to write about a conspiracy, wanted to also write about the fashion world, and wanted to write about this character, who's actually a character from an earlier novel. And what happened was the conspiracy that I started to concoct involved terrorism. And my choosing of the fashion world was really, I think the connection was, where would these terrorists want to unleash this conspiracy where no one else would look for it? And I thought they'd do it in a world where image is truth, where surface is truth, which to me was what the fashion industry and modeling was all about. And then, because the book is about a conspiracy, the narrative began to flow from that. And it's hard to write a book about a conspiracy without, having a story, explaining how this conspiracy is structured. But I also think a lot of it had to do, when I look back on the writing of this, a lot of it had to do with the fact that, I've gotten older. And as I've gotten older, I've realized in a lot of ways that lives have narratives. But you don't really see when you're in your early 20s. You really haven't experienced enough to understand that Yeah, you make choices in your life, and they sort of form a chain, and you can follow one choice to another choice to another choice, and that can, that's a life. And I don't think you're so aware of that when you're 24 or 25, where you think the world is just random, chaotic place, and just random events that don't, connect. So,
almost that's why parents and other people could be important in lives, and in many cases for those who seem most happy to have that benefit of parents who play that role. I mean, I think it was Shaw who once said that, youth is wonderful, it's too bad they wasted on the young.
Yes.
I've always thought that the opposite of that is that wisdom is wonderful too, it's too bad they wasted on the old,
Yes, I totally agree with that, yes.
But you still are fascinated with this models and this sort of apathy and boredom and depravity of the life of privilege. Those are two separate ideas.
Yes, that is true. And, I automatically want to say, I'm not so interested in models. I'm not so interested in serial killers or vampires or whoever I happen to write about.
Yes.
My cast, my repertoire of my last 5 books. But when you say that I am interested in dissecting privilege and how maybe badness, bad behavior can come out of privilege or having too much freedom, I'm more onto you then. I'm connecting more with you when you pose a question like that. And I think there is something that is a running theme throughout my books, that there is this fascination with privilege and equating it with bad behavior. And I don't know really exactly where that comes from in my own personal life and why that means a lot to me to keep going back to in my books. I sometimes think it has a lot to do with my father again, where when I was growing up, we grew up in a pretty middle-class household in the San Fernando Valley, far away from, well, not far away, but on the other side of the hill from, say, Beverly Hills or Bel Air, the swankier parts of L.A. And I remember it being a fairly normal middle-class household. And I do remember that once my father did start making a lot of money, his behavior intensified and changed. And with that money came a kind of decadence and came a kind of behavior that I just didn't find acceptable. And that could be an influence in the books, and that could be a motivating force in concocting these novels. If I think about it on those terms.
It's not just the life of privilege, though, that you sort of explore. It's also the life of labels and the life of names and all of that you include here. I mean, it's almost like the world of beauty personified by models, the world of in a sense wasted lives personified by some people who abuse a life of privilege, and the world of drugs and absence of accountability, all sort of play together on the same playing field here.
That's true, but there's also an added element of terrorism in this book, which is something that I haven't really touched on, I think, in any previous book, so I can add terrorists to the cast of my repertoire. The connection that I was really thinking about in Glamorama, and the thing that really fascinated me the most, was the connection between the beauty culture and terrorism. And for some reason, these two things kept coming together in my mind, and they informed Glamorama. And I guess the connection I was making there was that the beauty culture really feasts on insecurity, and it really is about you desiring things that you might not normally desire and realizing that you're not going to get them. And that insecurity it voiced is, I think, is cause for despair in this culture, and it makes us act in ways that I don't think we normally would act. And I think with terrorism, yes, they bomb planes, they bomb hotels, they bomb airliners, they bomb embassies and government offices, but the bombing is, I think, incidental to the idea that they want to cause insecurity, want to cause a sense of unease. That in many ways, that's the statement. You question your safety every time you're in a place like that, every time you go through a metal detector. That sense of insecurity and unease in the everyday world, I think, is something that they're after. And that's the connection that I was making in Glamorama.
Or the insecurity of people who don't have power, who want to find power behind the anonymity of a bomb or the anonymity of a terrorist strike.
Yes, but at the same time, I mean, I really wasn't getting that political with Glamorama. The terrorists in the book don't have a specific political affiliation, and they're more sort of abstract. And
their motivation is what? If it's not political,
it's destruction and chaos, basically. Destruction and chaos, and they're representative of all terrorists in a way, and they're involved in a great deal of murders and that don't seem to have any political affiliation, but there's hints that they're involved in much higher profile crimes, that assassinations of people that aren't necessarily connected with the government. It's just foisting a sense of unease and horror and spectacle onto a public.
How do you see drugs and your own drug usage, however large or small it was a problem, and creativity?
Automatically, I want to say in a major way that they are not connected and they cannot be connected. I know I've said before that I wrote a first draft of Less Than Zero in 1983 when I was on a crystal meth binge, I guess is what how the reporter put it, but that's really not the case. But anyway, yeah, there's some element of truth to that. And the draft of Less Than Zero that I wrote on that crystal meth binge was 1,000 pages long and horrible. So, and it took about 2 or 3 years.
You thought it was wonderful.
And at the time I did.
This was a magnus opus.
And you got to remember there weren't computers, and that was done on a typewriter. I mean, it took 2 or 3 years of basically sitting down with it sober and paring it down to its very, very small, compact size to make it work. There cannot be one for me. There isn't one with, say, either drinking or drugs.
You never believed that there was one, or?
I got over it very soon. I got over it with that Less Than Zero exercise.
Yeah, and you never thought that somehow the life of the artist demanded, which I assume you wanted to be, demanded some sense of some kind of abuse. I mean, in the same way that if you walk across to the Museum of Modern Art, there is Jackson Pollock, whose
right.
drinking was a part of his destruction.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. That was one thing that attracted me as a young man to many of the writers that influenced me, whether it was Hemingway, whether it was Fitzgerald, Faulkner, Kerouac, a writer who I really am not that interested in his work, but I was very, very interested in his life and the way he led it. And it seemed very romantic and suggestive to me, very exciting. And I think there is a part of that role-playing that goes on when you're a young writer where you either take up smoking because you think it looks like, the jacket photos of all those books that you read when you were a kid. I don't think authors now would dare pose with a cigarette on the back of a book, but it seemed very kind of romantic. And yeah, you do want to follow suit. You do think it's cool in a way to maybe drink too much or be a little bit too boisterous at a party because it connects with all the stories you heard about the writers that you love so much. And of course, you want to be taken in that way. You want to have some kind of persona.
You want to be portrayed as or see yourself as some angry young artist.
Well, I think when you're young, you
somehow has a privilege or an entitlement to wreak havoc because he or she is an artist.
Well, I think when you're young, you do. I think as you get older, you realize that's just phony and it's just not true. But and it doesn't work, and people don't buy it. But I do think that having a persona is one of the most important things that a writer can have. I think having a sort.
What kind of persona?
Well, having a recognition, having the sort of recognition where if your name is mentioned in a conversation, whether people have read your books or not, a list of associations come up to them, and they automatically have some idea of who you are. I mean, actually, Norman Mailer, I'm paraphrasing Norman Mailer, but there's something about that I think is probably very helpful to a writer and very helpful to his career as to a writer's career. I think that probably is helpful.
And what do you think your persona is?
Well, it's different everywhere I go. In the United States, it seems to be as a kind of spoiled party boy, which I find baffling in a way, and it seems to be taken much more seriously in Europe.
Your reputation is taken more seriously. You're taken more seriously as a writer in Europe.
Yeah.
And why do you think that difference is?
Because, I don't know. I think maybe because the books are so critical of a certain kind of American lifestyle that it seems very suggestive to them, very telling. It's telling them something
that you are, in fact, a part of or enamored of a certain lifestyle.
And satirizing.
And satirizing.
And satirizing, yeah.
But that your insight comes from participation.
Well, the insight probably does come from participation in a way. I mean, as judgmental and as critical as I am of the people I write about and the worlds I write about, I think you have to have some sort of toehold in them in order to write about them as at whatever length I do write about them. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think, yeah, I do criticize a lot of the worlds I've lived in before and a lot of the ways I've lived before. And I've been very critical of that. And I don't think that really alters my fictional landscape. I don't think it makes it less honest or more honest or whatever. I just think it's a fact.
What do you regret the most in this young life of 34 years?
What do I regret the most? Probably, well, you know what? Not a lot of regrets. You know, I have to tell you, not a lot of regrets. I don't really look at my life that way. I suppose not, maybe not dealing with my father in a way that was more beneficial to both of us. Instead of trying to understand, get past his anger and his frustration with his life, and me just kind of backing away from it and not wanting to deal with it. Maybe not trying to get closer and understand him a little bit better. That could have been a regret.
Bret Easton Ellis, Glamorama is the novel. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me, Charles.
Pleasure as always to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.